Tonight, we're diving into stories that might make you question what's lurking in the shadows around you. These aren't urban legends or ghost stories spun for Halloween. These are true encounters shared by real people who've brushed up against something terrifyingly unknown. From the depths of haunted woods to a hospital shift turned nightmare and the uneasy quiet of a darkened house, these experiences are as real as they are horrifying. So grab a blanket, turn off the lights, and hold on tight, because these stories are going to chill you to the core. I've always been drawn to places that most people avoid: abandoned buildings, overgrown trails, those quiet spots that seem untouched by time. There's a thrill in the unknown, in stepping into places where you feel like you're intruding on someone else's secrets. But after what I experienced one night, I'm not so sure I'll ever go exploring alone again. It was mid-October, and I was camping in the forest, a few hours from my hometown. I'd set up my tent near a small clearing, and was planning to stay for a couple of days. The first night was calm. I heard only the usual sounds of the forest, and by morning, everything seemed normal. But on the second night, I started feeling off. You know that feeling where you can't shake the sense that you're not alone? That's what I had. Every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves made me jump, even though I'd camped alone many times before without feeling this way. Around midnight, just as I was settling into my sleeping bag, I heard something outside my tent. Soft, shuffling footsteps. I froze, barely breathing, listening as the footsteps stopped right outside the fabric. Then, just as suddenly, they moved away, fading into the trees. I waited for what felt like hours, heart pounding, ears straining for any sound. I convinced myself it was probably an animal, maybe a deer. But when I finally drifted off, a sound jolted me awake. A distant, steady tapping, like someone hammering wood. It was faint, but definitely close enough to be in the same woods. Against my better judgment, I grabbed my flashlight and decided to find the source. I felt this weird compulsion, like something was drawing me in. The sound led me deeper into the woods than I'd ever gone. Eventually, I came across an old cabin, partially hidden by trees. The place looked ancient, the wood cracked and gray with vines snaking up the walls. But there was something even stranger, a dim light flickering inside. My first thought was that someone must be squatting in there, but as I got closer, I realized the light was moving, shifting from room to room. I'm not sure what made me do it, but I took a step closer, careful to stay quiet. The tapping was louder now, almost rhythmic. Peering through a broken window, I saw the inside of the cabin for the first time. It was empty, no furniture, nothing on the walls, just a single candle placed in the middle of the floor. And next to it, a series of strange symbols carved into the wood. I was about to turn back when I heard it. A low, guttural whisper from behind me. I whipped around, but there was no one there. Just trees and shadows stretching in the dim light. My heart was pounding, and every instinct was screaming at me to leave. But as I backed away from the cabin, I noticed something that sent chills down my spine. In the dirt just a few feet from where I stood, there was a trail of footprints, leading directly to the spot where I'd been standing. That's when the whispering started again, louder, closer, as if someone were speaking right into my ear. I didn't wait around to see what would happen next. I bolted, tearing through the woods, barely able to see where I was going. I ran until I saw the faint glow of my campfire in the distance, and I didn't stop until I was back inside my tent, zipper pulled tight. The next morning, I packed up and left. I don't know who or what was in that cabin, but I can still hear that whisper, that strange, steady tapping. And I'll never forget those footprints, too big to be mine, leading to exactly where I'd been standing. I used to work the night shift as a pharmacy technician at a hospital in Alabama. It was a quiet job for the most part, just me, a few nurses, and maybe the janitorial staff working late. I didn't mind the peace, even if it could get a bit eerie in the small hours of the morning when the hospital felt more like a tomb than a place of healing. I didn't believe in ghosts, at least not until one night that changed everything. It was a Tuesday around 3 a.m. The hospital was especially empty. The quiet so thick it felt like a weight on my chest. I was in the middle of restocking the supply room when I heard the door creak open behind me. Startled, I turned around, but no one was there. I shrugged it off. Maybe a draft, I thought. But just as I went back to stocking, I felt it. This ice-cold chill that shot straight down my spine. It was like someone was standing right behind me, watching. I turned again, and this time I saw something. A shadow, faint but unmistakable, slipping out of the room and into the hallway. I called out, thinking maybe it was one of the nurses. But when I walked to the doorway, the hallway was empty. I tried to shake off the unease, but that feeling of being watched stuck with me. The longer I stayed, the worse it got. By the time I went to the 5th floor to drop off meds, I was practically jumping at every sound. The 5th floor had been undergoing renovations, so half of it was shut down and dark, adding to the creepiness. But I needed to drop the meds off at the nurse's station, so I just went on with it. As I walked down the hallway, I heard a loud bang, like something heavy had fallen over in one of the empty rooms. I froze, looking around, but the whole floor was dark and deserted. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Just a glimpse, but enough to make my heart race. I peered into the room where I thought I saw something, and there, in the dim light, was a man. He was hunched over by one of the beds, head bowed as though he were praying or crying. I opened my mouth to ask if he was all right, but then he looked up. His eyes met mine, and what I saw will haunt me forever. His eyes were dark, almost hollow, with a strange expression, a mix of anger and sorrow. Blood was dripping from his nose, running down his face, staining his shirt. He looked at me, silent, unblinking, and I couldn't move. I was frozen, paralyzed by his stare. Then, without a sound, he turned and walked right out of the room, disappearing around the corner. I snapped out of my trance and ran after him, my footsteps echoing down the empty hallway. But when I turned the corner, he was gone. The hallway was empty, silent. It was like he had vanished into thin air. I was still trying to process what I'd seen when I heard the ding of the elevator at the end of the hall. I walked over, hoping to catch whoever, or whatever, I'd just seen. But as I got closer, the door slid open, and there was no one inside. Just an empty elevator waiting, as if inviting me to step inside. I felt a chill run through me, but I got in anyway, hoping to shake off the nerves by returning to the main floor. I hit the button for the 1st floor, but just before the doors closed, I saw him again, standing at the end of the hall, watching me with those dark, hollow eyes. And as the door slid shut, I heard his voice, barely a whisper, saying, "I'm still here." I never told anyone about what I saw that night. I didn't know how to explain it, and I didn't want people thinking I was losing it. But now, every time I work the night shift and pass by that 5th floor, I feel him, like he's watching, waiting for me to come back. And sometimes, in the dead silence of the early morning, I still hear that whisper, "I'm still here." I live in a quiet neighborhood with my boyfriend, and we're lucky. It's the kind of place where people don't worry much about locking doors or security cameras. It's peaceful, tucked away with only a handful of houses on our block. But after one weekend alone last October, I don't think I'll ever feel completely safe here again. My boyfriend Matt had flown out to Vegas for a bachelor party, leaving me alone for the weekend. Friday night, I invited some friends over for a wine night to keep myself entertained. We laughed, watched scary movies, and didn't think much of anything until around 11 p.m. when the doorbell rang. We all froze, the laughter dying as we exchanged glances. Late-night visitors in our neighborhood were almost unheard of, especially while we were watching a horror movie. I crept up to the door, hoping to peek through the glass pane at the top, but there was no one there. We tried to laugh it off, joking about pranksters, but a chill had already settled over the room. My friends left around midnight, and I fell asleep quickly, thinking that was the end of it. But around 2 a.m., the doorbell rang again, this time twice in quick succession. I shot up, heart pounding, and glanced at my phone. It was definitely too late for anyone to be ringing the bell. I called Matt, and although he was too drunk to offer much comfort, he assured me it was probably a fluke and to ignore it. Just as I started to calm down, I heard a knock at my bedroom window. My heart practically stopped. The sound was light, almost tentative, but I could feel something sinister about it. Then, a man's voice, calm and chillingly steady, called out, "I know you're home. I just need some help." I stayed completely silent, barely breathing, hoping he'd go away. But he didn't. Instead, I heard him start knocking again, louder this time. "I know you're in there." His voice was calm, patient, like he was talking to an old friend. My hand shook as I called the police, trying to keep my voice low. The operator assured me that officers would arrive within minutes, but those few minutes felt like hours. The man kept knocking, moving from the window to the door, his voice growing softer but somehow closer, like he was just on the other side. He said he needed help, that he just wanted to talk, but there was something in his tone that made my skin crawl. Finally, headlights swept up my driveway, and I heard footsteps on the porch. The knocking stopped. I opened the door just a crack to see two officers, one tall and broad, the other standing silently behind him. The taller one looked irritated, dismissive, like he didn't believe a word I'd said. He asked me for a description of the man, but I hadn't seen him, only heard his voice. They did a quick sweep of the property, then told me they hadn't found any sign of anyone. The taller officer told me it was probably just my imagination, that it was easy to get spooked when you're home alone. I wanted to argue to tell him I wasn't imagining anything, but he cut me off, saying if I called again without seeing anyone, they wouldn't come back. The officers left, and I was alone again. I locked every door and window, double-checking until I felt satisfied. But sleep didn't come easily. I lay awake, straining to hear any sounds, any hint that he might still be there. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and I drifted off. I woke up Saturday morning, feeling foolish, almost embarrassed. I convinced myself it had just been a weird prank, something I'd blown out of proportion. That night, I went to a friend's Halloween party, dressed up as Velma from Scooby-Doo, and managed to push the whole thing out of my mind. But when I came home just after 1 a.m., I knew something was wrong. The house was ice cold, and as soon as I stepped inside, I felt a breeze. I looked around and noticed that a window was open in the living room, a window I knew I'd locked before I left. I shut it, heart pounding, and then I saw something else. The basement door was slightly ajar. I hadn't been in the basement since Matt left, and we always kept that door shut. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but I had to know. I took a step toward the door, and as I peered down the stairs, I heard it. A faint, rhythmic clicking sound coming from the darkness below. I took a deep breath, hoping to steady myself, but then a voice, that same calm voice, drifted up from the basement. "You're finally home." It was him. He'd been inside the whole time. I bolted out of the house, running to my neighbors and pounding on their door until they let me in. I called the police from their house, barely able to speak as I told them what happened. This time, when the officers arrived, they took me seriously. They searched the basement, but whoever had been down there was gone, leaving only muddy footprints on the basement floor. I didn't sleep in that house again until Matt came home. And even now, every time I'm alone, I check the windows, the doors, and most importantly, the basement. Because every once in a while, I still hear that faint clicking sound echoing in my dreams. And I wonder if he's really gone. Whether it's an abandoned cabin in the woods, a haunted hospital hallway, or the chilling quiet of your own home, these stories remind us that sometimes reality is more terrifying than any fiction. We never know what's lurking in the shadows or watching from the darkness, until it's too late. If you made it this far, I hope you're watching this with the lights on. And if not, maybe check your windows, just in case. Thanks for joining me on this terrifying journey. If you love hearing true horror stories like these, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more spine-tingling tales. And remember, sometimes the scariest things are closer than you think. Stay safe, and sweet dreams.